Let's talk about stress, or more to the point, stress management. Because when it comes to life, stress is a natural part of it. Despite what most of us tend to think, it's not about removing a stressful stimulus. It's about learning to manage it better. After all, as the old saying goes, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. And therefore, you've got to look at how you're responding to stressful circumstances to know best of how to deal with them in the future, ways of which are going to best serve you. Because when we're stressed, we tend to think in the short term. We tend to think in just that moment, how do I relieve this stress right now? And we tend to forget about the long term. And this is where overconsumption of calories or underconsumption of calories, starving yourself, tends to come from. And people tend to bounce to either end of this spectrum. They either tend to overconsume on calories when there's a stressful kind of circumstance, turning to food, or they tend to do the opposite and they completely remove all calories. And it's all down to what's known as the habit loop. This is the habit loop, and it has three parts to it: the cue, the action, and the response. Now, the cue could be work, kids, exes, anything that tends to elicit a stress response, the things that tend to get you quite uptight. Then you have the action, what you tend to do in response to that cue. Then, once you perform the action, be it turning to food or starving yourself, that kind of thing, you have the response, or sometimes known as the reward. Reward I use as a loose term, and that tends to be a temporary relief of the stress, or a distraction, if you will. But the problem is, in most cases, what tends to happen is this is a vicious circle, because you do something which gives you temporary relief, but in the long term fucks you over further. So you feel shitter about things, and therefore that gets you stressed, and you repeat this vicious cycle over and over again. So how do we change that? Well, you can't always change the cue. You can't get rid of your kids. You can't always necessarily get rid of exes, because there may be kids, other things involved. And you can't always up sticks, change your work, change your environment. So cue is not necessarily something that you can change in that moment. But you can change your action to that cue. Now, if you tend to overeat, or even if you tend to undereat, one of the best things you can do is firstly become mindful of this, okay? Recognize these stages when you are next stressed. Writing things down can really help with this. But what you want to do is change your action. So something like picking up the phone and calling a friend, something like going for a walk, maybe going and doing some exercise, taking yourself out of the environment, doing something different to what you've usually done. Because if you tend to turn to that chocolate bar that's hidden in your office desk, or you tend to go, right, I'm not going to eat anything, sure, you'll get a temporary relief, be it from additional sugary foods, additional calories, giving you that temporary feeling of, oh, that feels better, or be it a temporary relief in the form of starving yourself, and therefore a distraction from the stress to begin with, okay? Almost a response to it by going, I'm not going to consume any food, I'm not going to do anything like that, because that's going to make me feel worse. And this is where people can yo-yo between these two ends of the spectrum. So I've known numerous people that have overconsumed as a result of stress, but then they've gone the opposite end of the spectrum, and they've then tended to not eat when it comes to stress. And like I said, that tends to make people then feel shitter. So what you need to focus on is changing your action to that, okay? If there's a certain person, certain thing that tends to cause you stress over time, the best thing you can do is change your response, or change your action towards it. That will then change your response. Because like I said, it tends to be short term, but if you go for a walk, talk to a friend as the action, you will almost download your problems, offload your problems, or compartmentalize them, recognizing and being mindful of the response that that person or that stressful stimulus tends to have on you. And then your response will be to feel better, not just temporary relief, but long-term relief, because you managed it better, and you won't have this vicious cycle at the bottom of feeling stressed afterwards, because you'll feel better. You will have been for a walk, you'll have got some exercise, you'll have served your long-term goal, or better still, you'll have spoken to a friend and managed your problems better, talked about them, got them out in the open and discussed things further. Habits all work along the same lines as these three actions. So once you begin to master these three and start modifying your actions to stressful circumstances or other circumstances that might come along, then you begin to regain control. And when you begin to regain control, life gets a hell of a lot better, and you don't just get temporary relief, you get long-term relief. hopefully that makes sense, folks. Obviously, it all depends on your specific circumstance you're dealing with. Every single one of you watching this manages your stress differently at the moment and goes through different stresses. Of course, there are the generic things, but everybody has different responses to that stress. Everybody has different areas and different things that they turn to when they are stressed. What we need to do is make sure that your response serves you in the long term, doesn't just give you short-term relief like drugs or a cigarette would. It gives you long-term relief, which is going to serve you to be a better version of yourself. Thanks ever so much for watching, folks, and I will see you on the next video.